In 1942, a smartly attired 29-year-old man by the name of Charles Carpenter signed up to join the United States Army as a commissioned officer. A high school teacher by trade, Carpenter was well educated and well liked by his peers and the folks of Edgington, Illinois, the small town in Rock Island County where he hailed from. After passing through basic training and earning his commission as second lieutenant, he was selected to go to flight school where he would learn to fly small artillery liaison aircraft, including the Army's version of the Piper Cub, the L-4 Grasshopper, and the Stinson L-5 Sentinel. Generally unarmed, they lacked any form of protection for the pilot, whose job was to relay enemy positions back to friendly artillery units so that the latter would have good effects on targets during fire missions. Though Charles was stuck in the United States for a while, waiting for his chance at combat, he made the most of his time by racking up flight hours in both airframes. Rising up through the ranks, he pinned on gold oak leaves and was officially a major in the Army when he was notified of his imminent deployment to France in 1944. Upon reaching France, he was assigned to the 1st Bombardment Division under the command of Major General R.B. Williams. Carpenter, though he exuded the image of a history teacher, was very much the live wire when it came to combat. When attached temporarily to a ground unit for the purpose of scouting out possible landing strips, he came across a mechanized infantry section held down by blistering German fire emanating from nearby an enemy-held town. Running up to the lead tank in the column, he depressed the butterfly trigger on an M2 50 caliber machine gun and spat out lead in the general direction of the Nazi soldiers, who were attempting to slow down the section's advance. Shouting, "Let's go!" he rallied the soldiers and tanks ahead, though he didn't really have any command authority over the men around him, considering that he wasn't even in their chain of command. The soldiers ripped through the town, and in minutes, the Nazi units that had previously held the area fled. Though Carpenter was actually arrested by military police and charged, he was quickly rescued by General Patton in person, who proudly exclaimed that Carpenter was the very kind of man with fight and determination that he wanted in the Third Army. Receiving a Silver Star for his courage and valor, Carpenter was sent back to 1st Bombardment. Carpenter flew a number of artillery spotting and reconnaissance missions immediately afterward, but quickly became frustrated with his lack of offensive armament, which would have otherwise given him the ability to attack German units on the ground, especially when other friendly aerial and ground units weren't able to engage. After hearing stories through the grapevine on other pilots who had attached all sorts of weapons to their aircraft for defensive and offensive use, Carpenter requested and secured permission from his command to do the same. Enlisting an ordnance technician and a few crew chiefs to assist him with his incredibly unconventional idea, he tacked on a pair of M1 bazookas to the struts of the Grasshopper. Christening his aircraft Rosie the Rocketer, he scored his first kill against a German armored car. Evidently not satisfied with just knocking out small troop transport vehicles, he promptly blew 4 tanks to Kingdom Come. By this time, Carpenter had added 4 more bazookas to Rosie, bringing the total armed complement up to 6, all rigged up to switches in the cockpit that would allow him to fire the weapons. For the most part, he would unleash the M6 rockets ensconced within the bazooka tubes at a range of around 100 yards, flying through a maelstrom of small arms fire, but staying on course until he was either forced to pull up by virtue of the steadily increasing ground fire coming his way, or if he was able to score a kill. Inspired by the man they now called the Mad Major, other Grasshopper pilots attempted to add bazookas to their aircraft as well, but quickly abandoned the idea during trial runs. It was simply too crazy, and nothing about the prospect of having to fly through withering enemy fire at ranges so close that you could see the bootlaces on the Germans shooting at you, or releasing a deadly cargo of rockets while having your aircraft shudder violently, appealed to them at all. The brutal Grasshopper. Aircraft like Carpenter's unarmed L-4 Grasshopper were perfect for low-level, low-speed reconnaissance. But old Bazooka Charlie aspired to do more than spot enemy tanks. He wanted to destroy them himself. Its simple strut-braced monoplane design made the aircraft extremely manageable at the sort of low, loitering speeds needed for a reconnaissance or military liaison aircraft. The Cub was so well suited for the role that the American military would eventually order more than 5,400 of the newly dubbed L-4 Grasshoppers for the fight. With just a pilot on board, the Grasshopper would top out at 85 miles per hour, had a service ceiling of 12,000 feet, and could remain airborne for around 3 hours. It wasn't long before Carpenter found his way into the fight, jumping on a .50 caliber machine gun during an engagement with Nazi troops. After firing for a few minutes, Carpenter chose to lead a group of soldiers into the German-held town they'd come from, and despite not being their commander, the troops followed. In the midst of the fighting, Carpenter ordered the tank he jumped on to open fire on another vehicle that soon proved to be American. He was promptly arrested after the incident and threatened with a court-martial. That is, until General Patton himself intervened on the young pilot's behalf. It was after that close call that Carpenter decided to keep his fighting in the air. Inspired by stories he'd heard from other unarmed scout aircraft, now Major Charles Carpenter decided to follow suit, strapping not one, but 6 M1 AI bazookas to the wing struts of his Grasshopper. Aided by an ordnance tech and a crew chief, the bazookas were wired into the cockpit of the airplane and could be fired by flipping switches either individually or all at once. Each bazooka could fire a single rocket-propelled anti-tank grenade that could penetrate as much as 3 inches of armor plating. That was enough to take out a tank if you hit it in the right places, but would be practically useless against the Nazi armor when engaging head-on. Bazooka Charlie and Rosie the Rocketeer. With his Grasshopper now equipped with enough firepower to rain holy hell down on his enemies, Carpenter took to calling his aircraft Rosie the Rocketeer, in honor of the cultural icon representing women working in factories and shipyards back home in the States. His plane wasn't the only thing to get a new nickname though, and soon after he began flying with his bazookas, Charlie Carpenter became better known among the troops around him as Bazooka Charlie. Carpenter's first kill came quickly, eliminating a German armored car before upgrading some of his bazookas to the more capable M9 platform, which could fire the M6A3 high-explosive anti-tank rounds he'd need to go after bigger prey. Soon, the Germans began to realize that the crazy Grasshopper scouting them was just as capable of destroying vehicles as the artillery he guided, prompting them to fire on him anytime he appeared in the sky. Despite the hail of gunfire, Carpenter would dive his aircraft directly at Nazi tanks and open fire with his bazookas at only about 100 meters off the ground. Then he'd pull straight up, hoping to get back out of range of the enemy gunfire before they managed to shoot him down. The Mad Major goes on the offensive. These exploits soon earned Bazooka Charlie yet another nickname, the Mad Major. Although Carpenter had been inspired by other pilots who had armed their aircraft, his wild success at fighting armored vehicles inspired other artillery scout and reconnaissance pilots to follow suit. But according to press coverage at the time, the other pilots found that driving their frail aircraft into a hail of German small arms fire was extremely unhealthy. As a result, most returned to their less dangerous observation duties. Whether you knew him as Bazooka Charlie, the Mad Major, or just as Major Carpenter, the man tended to live up to his larger-than-life reputation. At one point, he destroyed a German column advancing toward Allied troops, and instead of flying back to base, he chose to land his aircraft in a nearby field to scout out the damage he'd wrought. While doing so, he'd managed to take an additional 6 German soldiers prisoner with a rifle he'd found on the ground, which, it probably goes without saying, was not a common practice among artillery scout pilots. Carpenter once said, "Some people around here think I'm nuts, but I just believe that if we're going to fight a war, we have to go on with it 60 minutes an hour and 24 hours a day." Not long after, Carpenter would match some of the exploits found among Spitfire pilots in the Battle of Britain, despite flying an aircraft that was never meant for combat. During a patrol, Carpenter found an American infantry unit pinned down by German soldiers, and he sprung into action, engaging the German positions with his onboard weapons. When he ran out of firepower, he flew straight back to base and had the ordnance team rearm his Grasshopper for another jaunt. After expending all of his rockets again, he returned once more for rearmament. After flying 3 combat sorties into the fight, Carpenter had managed to destroy 2 German tanks and break up the Nazi attack. British pilots defending against Nazi bombers in the Battle of Britain would often fly multiple sorties a day in order to beat back the overwhelming Luftwaffe numbers, though they often used amphetamines to push through the exhaustion. By the time World War II came to a close, Charles Carpenter was officially credited with killing 6 Nazi tanks, making him an official tank ace, though many claim his unofficial number was actually much higher. According to some accounts, Carpenter and his airplane, Rosie the Rocketeer, took out at least 14 Nazi tanks, a number of other armored vehicles, and dozens of enemy soldiers. He never took as much as a scratch from enemy fire, earning him one more nickname among the Allied troops he fought alongside: the Lucky Major. Carpenter was now a fast-growing legend. Adding to the madness aura surrounding him, he once alighted his Grasshopper on a field near a column of German tanks he'd just lit up from above, grabbed a few discarded German rifles, and took 6 enemy soldiers prisoner while hosing down anything that moved. The guy was madness personified, sure, but you can't deny that his courageousness and tenacity knew no bounds. In late September of 1944, Carpenter got wind of armor attack on one of the 4th Armored Division's battlefield headquarters. Flying through a dense fog with little to no forward visibility, he remained in the air until the air cleared. Scanning the ground for targets of opportunity, he quickly located a group of Panzer tanks and armored personnel carriers moving towards the beleaguered Combat Command AHQ. By now, the Germans on the ground knew that Carpenter was in town, and they needed to stop him before he launched yet another debilitating attack on their armor, which were well protected on the front and sides, but were marginally shielded on top. Training all of their guns on him, they were unable to deter Carpenter, who flew like a man possessed. Launching his rockets, he took out a set of armored cars, inflicting casualty upon casualty before returning to base to refuel and rearm. He repeated this twice more until all friendly soldiers pinned down were able to egress and escape to safety. By the end of the war, Carpenter had been awarded the Silver Star and Air Medal twice apiece, and the Bronze Star, all for his unmatched bravery, creativity, and determination. He would be officially credited with only 6 tanks disabled or destroyed, but he, along with the soldiers and airmen who served with him or were covered by him from above, knew that the count was far higher. After falling seriously ill in 1945, it was discovered that Carpenter was afflicted with Hodgkin's disease. Discharged from the Army as a lieutenant colonel and now known as Bazooka Charlie, he returned to Illinois, told that he had less than 2 years to live. As ever the fighter, he went back to teaching high school history and survived until 1966, when cancer finally caught up with him. Sometimes you wonder if any of his students were aware of the fact that one of the most colorful pilots to have ever served in Army Green was standing up at the front of the classroom, lecturing them on history that he, in a small part, was able to co-write.